Good afternoon. As Lou stated, my name is Rhonda Baker. I'm the city's historic preservation specialist. I'm your go-to for any type of projects you want to do that involve historically designated properties. I'm just going to do a brief overview of some of the processes involved with historic preservation. There are technically two types of historically designated properties. Most are familiar with districts like Heritage Hill, Fairmount Square that incorporate hundreds or thousands of structures. We also have individual landmarks in the city. Those are individual sites. They may hold one building, one object, 2 buildings, 3 buildings. They're located scattered throughout the city, and we have roughly 80 of them. To give you an idea, it ranges everywhere from the Blue Bridge downtown to cemeteries to the American Seating Factory, the old Berkey and Gay, which is right down here, to homes like the Turner home that's on front. If anybody knows this tiny little stone house that sits by itself in a sea of parking lots, that's a landmark. So there's a wide range of types and styles, and they are all over the city. So I suggest if you're kind of looking at a home or project and you have a question, is this historic? You can always call or email me. I'm readily available to answer, because sometimes it's not always easy to make that determination if it's a landmark. As far as the review process goes, we cover everything that affects the exterior of buildings, objects, grounds, the site, site features, environment. The only time we review interior projects is if they affect the exterior. We want to remodel a bathroom, the windows in the tub, we want to get rid of it. That's an exterior change. We want to put a furnace in, that's interior, but if you have to vent it outside, that's exterior. So that's kind of the differentiation between the two. Our permit is called a Certificate of Appropriateness. I didn't name it, it's clunky, but it is what it is. It's a mouthful. Also, you need to know that there are a lot of projects that we require a historic permit for. Building department does not require a building permit for. So don't assume that if it doesn't need a building permit that it doesn't need a historic permit, because that's incorrect. There are 2 types of reviews. I'm namely going to talk about the commission's review, but the other type is staff, which is me. I have a list of elements that I can review that is bestowed upon me by the commission, so it is defined. Turnaround for staff reviews is typically a day to 2 days. Cost is $25. 95% of the stuff we see in a year is staff review. So if you have any questions about that, I can talk to you about it later. But what we're going to focus on is commission. The commission is the Historic Preservation Commission. It's a 7-member group that's appointed by the City Commission. This isn't a neighborhood group. This is not a neighborhood association. It's an official, legal city commission who is ordered with governing the city's ordinance for historic preservation, both by research as well as reviewing the permits. When they make these reviews, they're not arbitrary. They are required by law to follow the Secretary of Interior standards as well as our local guidelines. The Secretary of Interior standards are on the side there. There are 10 standards. They've also developed a set of guidelines for communities to use, and we use their guidelines to help create our personal local guidelines. To use a local set of guidelines, they have to be certified by the state, which we have done. So when making their determination, they're going to apply the standards you see on the side as well as this book, which is our local guidelines book. So when they make a motion and you hear them reference, we approve based on standard 5 and 6, that's what they're referring to, or local standard windows. That's what they're referring to as this book. When you apply, you will also get a link to our packet. So within that packet, you'll see a staff report that outlines what you're requesting and lists all the standards that apply to your specific type of project. So you'll get a sense of what they're looking at and the questions they may ask and how they're going to approach it before you even get to them. There it goes. I did do a brief graph, and I'm going to get into it a little bit deeper as we move on the overall process. Can I move around? Okay, because this is bothering me. Essentially, you're going to start here, which is contact me within your project, because that lets me get a sense of what you're looking for and help direct you as if it's staff review, commission review. Hey, if we tweak this little element, we can move it from commission review to staff. So that's where you really want to start, is to get a feel of your timeline and process. If it's going to be commissioned and it's a sizable project, I'm going to direct you to go and talk to your neighborhood. Although commissions can't base their decision completely on neighborhood input, it does factor into their discussion. And it can factor in heavily depending on what you're proposing to do. and they want to hear it from you, not from us. And then we just split off into two approaches. If it's a smaller project, you're probably going to go straight to applying to the commission, and assuming there's no issues, they can approve it immediately. If there are, they can physically table it, and it'll move you back another meeting. If it's a complicated, larger project, we're going to direct you to an advisory discussion. From there, they're going to give you feedback, and then we'll go down the process of actual review for formal.
We're going to pull up our very short PowerPoint, the process for the tax credit, and then we'll take more different questions, maybe show you a few examples of projects we've done from our website. So, we get out of this.
Here. Okay. Major requirement for a tax credit project is that it is either listed individually in the National Register of Historic Places, or it is a contributing structure, which means it adds to the history of a historic district that's listed in the National Register, or is certified by the Park Service as qualifying to be listed in the National Register. So that's the main thing. If it is already in a district, you're set. If it needs to be designated, then you're going to have to go through the process of having the building to see if it is eligible for designation, and then either yourself or find someone, which we do, is to write a National Register nomination so that we'll be listed. Those things used to happen consecutively. They could happen at the same time, but these days it's a little more difficult dealing with funders who often are not aware of the regulations. So we've had a couple of projects where we had to have the building designated before they could even get funding. So that's a whole new thing. It makes things go along. And it's a substantial rehab. You have to spend on your rehab. You get a 20% credit for what you spend on the rehab, but it has to be adjusted basis, which is you take the value of your property less the value of the land, and that value of the building itself, you must spend $1 more than that value in order to qualify for the federal credit. So that is, that's a major rehab. That's not just putting on a new roof or something. You're going to have to spend a fair amount of money, unless you've spent $3 for the building or something. You're going to have to spend a fair amount of money to qualify. Unfortunately, Michigan, or fortunately, Michigan used to have state tax credit, which you only had to spend 10% of the state equalized value. And it applied both to owners and to income-producing property. But the federal credit is only on income-producing property. If you own your house and you're going to do a major rehab, you do not qualify.
If you're a landlord and you own
Yes.
a house and a multiple apartments unit, you can get credit because it's income producing. Oh, so here we covered a little bit
Yes.
of the project, the tax credit. Oh, in the microphone?
Here,
Oh,
okay.
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Here, I'll put it down for you.
So all rehab costs are included in the tax credit, eligible costs. Also, architects, engineers, accountants, our fee, any consultant, other consultants that you have to have on the project. All those soft costs are included. Movable things are not included. You can't, appliances, for example, are not part of the tax credit. In some cases, floor coverings are not part of the credit, depending upon whether they're glued to the floor. If your carpeting is glued to the floor, then it's eligible. If it's not, then it isn't. So a lot of developers have gone to using wood floors for that reason, because it is a can be part of the costs rather than carpeting. If you have a really big project, you can sell those credits. A lot of banks buy the credits, and you form a partnership. And so if you yourself cannot use all of the credits, perhaps only a part of the credits, you can bring in a partner that can use the rest of the credits. All of this is, why does the federal government do this? It's protecting the character-defining pieces of our city. It was a result of the Public Act of 1966, if any of you remember urban renewal, where our cities were being totally gutted out. Everything was being torn down. Heritage Hill, for example, was designated in 1972, was put on the National Register then, and it's stopped plans that were going to essentially tear down the north and south part of the entire neighborhood. And the loss that would have brought to the city in just plain tax money. Look, it's a popular neighborhood. All of our historic districts have become extremely popular neighborhoods, and that has been an excellent source of income for the city. If it had been the occasional office surrounded by parking lots, which was the plan, we wouldn't have come out so well. I think you can look at Detroit as an example of what had happened there. The really exciting parts of Detroit right now are the parts that were designated as historic districts and were saved so that people could come in and live there and help to stabilize the city.
I think, though, just in terms of the tax credits, I think the tax credit came about in the 80s. It doesn't really matter that much, but that was an economic benefit. It's a carrot. No one forces you to take the tax credit. If you do a project on a historic building, you do not have to take the tax credit. So it is kind of a beautiful thing for us. We just tell people, you don't have to do this. No one's forcing you. It has nothing to do with Rhonda and the city. Absolutely nothing. Although if you come before them and say, we're doing a tax credit, I think generally they say, oh, okay, this is going to be a project that's held to the standards that Rhonda discussed, because they're the same standards that apply. It's not required of anyone. It's completely just an optional thing to get a very nice economic benefit and the city and the rest of us, the citizens, get a really good project, usually in the end, that respects the historic character of the buildings. So,
although we agree on that, there's a big difference. If you're going to do a tax credit project, it's not only outside, it's also inside.
that's true. That's a good.
Everything that you do on the building is reviewed both by the State Historic Preservation Office and the Park Service in Washington. So it's inside and outside.
I just forwarded it. Did I? Oh, I had program. Oh, we talked about the benefits, some of the negatives to be aware of, or you could perceive as negatives. It can slow your project down. You have extra review times. But like kind of dovetails into Rhonda's point, I think it often makes a better project. It forces you to plan and think about the details, and forces your client, it often.
It always
Always
makes a better
forces you.
project.
And it really ends up being, the better window selection and the parameters force creativity, but it does slow things down. So I always tell people that, be aware of that. It can be quite complex. That's where, a project might need a consultant like us or a knowledgeable architect, or, it can be complex. So it really helps to have people know what they're doing. And as I said, it forces organization and pre-planning. And it doesn't, you don't have to get everything all buttoned up and approved before you start work, but you're at risk of not getting the credit. People usually barrel ahead because they can't wait, but you kind of move with, some comfort level that you're doing the right thing.
And I can't stress enough, if you're doing a major project, either infill or the rehab of a building, is to hire an architect who knows what they're doing, who has done a tax credit project before and has done a historic rehab project before. Dentists are called doctors, but you wouldn't go to them to take out your appendix. And architects who do not work with historic buildings have a whole different viewpoint, and I think they can cost you money and they can cost you time.
Well, we should say there likely is probably a good chunk of architects here it doesn't mean you can never do them if you've never done them, but one of the things we've noticed just from our perspective as consultants is a lot of architects will say, well, we've worked on old buildings. You know, they really haven't done the tax credit project. There's a big difference. Working on an old building is just an existing building. Working on a tax credit project is a completely different deal. So you could learn and be guided and learn it through anybody could of course get that knowledge, but sort of having that mindset that this is a different deal. You can't do whatever you want. You have to respect certain features, understand what those features are. So we were just saying, you know, it's sort of a level of respect for the process and that it does take some learning curve. And but lots of people get excited about it and get very creative with what can we do with these parameters. Let's see. So here's just the bare bones of some of the process.
It's a 3-part application. Part 1 is that you have to show that it is either located in a historic district, an eligible historic district, or it is eligible for individual listing in the National Register. That's part 1. You provide historic photographs, a history of the property to show that it's either contributing or that it can be listed separately, and also that you're intending to list it separately by filing a National Register nomination. Part 2 is essentially a very large work plan. We go through and take photographs of the entire building. Now, if you're doing a small 3-story building, that's one thing. We did the Berkey and Gay, which was a 500,000 square foot building. So it's quite a project. They don't come here to look at the building, so we have to show it to them. We have to show them what it looks like now. And those photographs are then connected to drawings showing existing conditions. And they're also, we have drawings showing what your plan is. What do you plan to do with this? That all then is reviewed both at the state and at the federal level. Then when the project is completed, part 3 comes in, and that's go through the building again, taking photographs as close to the original photographs that were submitted as possible, showing that the work that was done was the work that they approved. Now you can, I don't know, do we have it somewhere here? You can do a 2-year project, which is just a 1-part project, or you can do a multiple project that goes over 5 years. And you essentially handle that by amending your original work plan for the added work that you're going to do. That's something that you'll want to look at with your specific project. But the final thing is, again, photographs. Occasionally, I think the state and the feds will send someone to look at a particularly difficult project. We've had that before. The Traverse City,
You know, the psychiatric hospital.
hospital.
They came to look at those hallways, were incredibly wide there and concrete and a real trouble for the designers and the architects. So I think
They worked very
the
closely.
National Park Service flew out there to look at it. So sometimes, or were flown out there. I think I don't think they do it without being
No,
paid
no, no,
for.
they were flown out.
Right.
But every building brings its own problems. And like that one, if they're specifically difficult, you're dealing with the wide hallways and I think 3-foot thick walls. It was quite the building, or a group of buildings.